All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So first off, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Andy Syrewicze with Altaro Software, and you're here to hear about 3 emerging technologies that will change the way that you use Hyper-V. Now, one thing about this webinar, if you've attended an Altaro webinar before this, typically we do an educational style webinar where we've got a topic and we'll teach you, the listener, about a particular subject. Well, we're changing things up a little bit with this webinar. We've kind of doing a panel style discussion this time, and with me today I've got Thomas Maurer and Didier VanHoye. How's it going, guys?
Hello.
Hi, great.
Well, hey, first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to actually go over our agenda for today. So first thing we're going to do some introductions of myself, Thomas, Didier, and the sponsor, Altaro Software. And then I've got a little bit of information about the format that we're doing today for this webinar. So I've got some information on that. And then we're going to get to the 3 things that you're really here to talk about and listen about today. We're going to talk about the public cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, basically all things public cloud. We're going to talk about that movement in the industry. Then we're going to get to Azure Stack, and really the fact that in that platform we're seeing this complete abstraction of Hyper-V and the fact that it's being pushed down under the hood. We're going to talk about kind of what that means for IT pros, kind of what that means for the industry as well. Then we're going to get into a talk about containers, microservices. Containers really seems to be one of the big buzzwords of the industry right now. And we're going to talk about kind of that phenomena, what it means for people, and how we think containers are going to change things moving forward. And then finally, we'll kind of wrap things up with what I call a final Q&A. So one thing about this webinar is really it is about you guys. So you can feel free to ask questions, feel free to make comments, and we will definitely incorporate them into today's discussion. And that final Q&A is just kind of the last chance for people to do that. So let's get to some introductions. Again, my name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist for Altaro Software, who's the sponsor of today's webinar. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and a VMware vExpert. I've been in the industry for 14 years. My focus has always been on the Windows Server Stack, virtualization, VMware vSphere, and supporting technologies, really. I'm quite active on Twitter. If you like to use Twitter, you can reach me at @asyrewicze there. Apologies, you're going to have to spell my last name. I really should get around to changing that, but I just haven't gotten there yet. So, additionally, I am quite active on Altaro's blogs at altaro.com/hyper-v and /VMware respectively. And then one thing I'd like to point out about that Hyper-V blog there, we will be posting a follow-up post about this webinar today at that location. So you can go there, you can get a copy of the webinar and look at any follow-up questions or comments or anything like that in regards to this webinar as well. And then, like I said, with me today, I've got Didier VanHoye. How's it going, Didier?
Fine, thank you.
Good, good. Well, Didier is also a Microsoft MVP in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency, and he is a Microsoft Infrastructure Architect at the Flemish Geographical Information Agency. Didier really focuses on Microsoft technologies and storage technologies, and he is a wealth of information about both of those. So if you'd like to reach Didier, he's got some links there to his Twitter handle and his blog at blog.workinghardinit.work. And then also we've got Thomas Maurer. How's it going, Thomas?
Hey, good. How are you, Andy?
Good, good. Thomas is also a Microsoft MVP, again, in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency. Thomas is a cloud architect and technology lead for iNetix, focusing on Microsoft technologies. And specifically to today's discussion, Thomas has spent a lot of time working with Azure Stack. So looking forward to his insights when we get to that section of the talk. Just like Didier and myself, Thomas has some links here to Twitter and his blog there at thomasmaurer.ch. And with that, the next thing I'll talk about is the sponsor real quick. So again, Altaro Software, the company I work for, we're a fast-growing developer of fantastic, super easy-to-use backup software designed specifically for SMBs and mid-market businesses and service providers operating in those spaces as well. Our virtual backup solution is trusted by 40,000 plus customers and 7,000 plus partners and MSPs worldwide, and that flagship product is Altaro VM Backup. If you're interested in a little bit more information about that, you can go to altaro.com/VM-backup for more information. So I want to talk about today's format a little bit. So like I said, this is a little bit different webinar format than we usually do here at Altaro. This is our first ever panel style webinar. So you're kind of part of history in the making here, right? And really this webinar is all about discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. Everything is opinion driven. It's, seeing where things in the industry are going. So we're going to talk about three major things. And again, this is kind of our insights, but we'd also like to encourage you to participate as well. You can join the conversation by using that questions form in the webinar UI. So, yes, it's a questions form, but if you just have a comment that you'd like to share, you have some insight, maybe an experience that you've run into, feel free to use that questions form to let us know. As time allows, we'll definitely incorporate that into our conversation where applicable. So what we're going to do is each panelist will kind of provide their opinion on a specific item, and then we'll kind of open it up for discussion after that. So with that in mind, let's get to the first major point of today's discussion. So we all ready to go, gents? We ready for some good discussion here?
Absolutely.
All right. All right. So the first thing that I really want to focus on as part of this discussion is the concept of the public cloud. Now, from a Hyper-V perspective, from a Microsoft perspective, that is Azure. But whereas we'll talk about Azure as part of this discussion, we're also going to talk about AWS potentially. We'll talk about other public cloud platforms as it makes sense, right? So really, this section is just about the public cloud as a whole and what it means for our industry. So I want to talk about the first bullet point here. And that is, it's pretty apparent that this cloud thing is here to stay, right? And I guess I'll tackle that first myself, and we'll pass it around to Didier and then Thomas to comment as well. But from my perspective, yes, it's very apparent that this thing is here to stay. There is a lot of advantages to be had with the public cloud. And where I see it in use is that it's a tool for us, right? I know a lot of people get concerned that, hey, all my workloads are going to be going to the public cloud. I'm not going to be able to see the hardware anymore. But I don't see it strictly that way. I see it as another place that we can run our workloads. And it makes sense to run the workload where it makes sense to run it, right? Some workloads are better in a public cloud space. Some workloads are better on premises. It just depends, right? So I see the cloud that definitely, yes, it is here to stay. And it's something that I think all IT pros can take advantage of moving forward. So with that, Didier, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I concur. I mean, the discussion about the cloud, whether it's here to stay, it's like that's over. The cloud is here, and we've been using it more and more. And the good news is the cloud is becoming better and better and richer in capabilities. So do not worry about that going to the cloud, either wholesale or partially, is a stupid idea. It is not. It will be there for quite a while. Are there challenges? Yes, but you have challenges on premises. So in that regards, nothing has changed. If you're worried about your job, the only thing I can say, it only gets busier and busier. So I shouldn't worry about that one too much. Not at all.
Right, right. Yeah, that's good insight. Thomas, would you like to weigh in?
I can just agree with you too on this one. It's still funny to see how things are changing, right, to the public cloud and how things are going on. And there are still some where different customers are in different stages, different companies are in different stages. There are ones like really far in front, already building the next Netflix or Uber or whatever based on a public cloud. Then there are companies shifting now. They're right now shift and lift workloads or building new workloads or migrating workloads or just as Didier, when we had this pre-discussion, mentioned, like cherry picking the parts from the cloud which are really helpful. And then that where they are. And then there are still some companies or some people left which say, yeah, cloud, yeah, not going to do it. And then I still have them conversations, and it's still funny to see that, like, you still have all three stages, right? And some are like really resistant to change and don't want to have the fact yet that cloud is a thing.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely that makes sense. And I mean that kind of plays into the other two bullet points that we've got on this slide. You've got people that are wondering, hey, is the public cloud going to kill on-premises computing? And I'll talk to that point. I don't think it's going to. Like I said, I think that the cloud is, again, it's a tool in our toolbox. And Thomas, you mentioned, kind of cherry picking the applications that make sense to run in the cloud. I think that's a good step. And then you mentioned Uber as well. You've got these vendors that are making these, in some cases, life-altering applications for society that really depend on kind of that distributed, geographically diverse cloud model. So I think those types of applications really make sense to run in that space. But I think you're still going to have your on-premise computing for years and years and years and years and years, right? So I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's not going to be right now. It's going to be in the short term or in the midterm that it's going away, right? There are so many challenges to solve in terms of legal stuff, like government stuff, data sovereignty stuff, which has to change. Just for example, in Switzerland we have cantons, and there was one canton. Basically, that's like states in the U.S., for example, but very, of course, much smaller. And yeah, so there was one which had a rule in their data privacy regulations which said if you give data outside of your data center, you have to be able to visit the data or go to the data, right?
Physically. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. You have physical access to the data, and
okay.
And if you're using a public cloud, that's just not possible, right? There is no way you get access to your servers. I don't think even Microsoft or Amazon do even know on which server your data is, right? And then of course challenges and things like that, and a lot of stuff. But to be honest, I'm working well, not in a startup anymore, but in a company which was born in the time when Office 365 became a thing. And if you build a new company today, most of the time, probably you don't really need on-prem hardware anymore or on-premise server. If you're an existing company, that's different. But if you take away the regulations and the networking issues we have today, like internet access and everything, if that goes away in 10 years, why not just move everything? Well, I talk about 10 years, right? Not about right.
It all depends on the use case, and the thing that is going to make on-premise stick around a bit longer than, let's say, the big cloud providers would like, and perhaps even customers would like, is the fact that you have this huge legacy, which can be a very beneficial legacy because that's what's making you money today still. But it's there, and if it's based on client server or Windows applications, those tend to have a very long tail. So today, people more and more for new projects are building cloud native applications, and even with those, you have an enormous choice to choose which to use to build them. But all the other ones, unless you have a magic wand, are not going away just like that. So you'll have to maintain them, you'll have to transition them. That's a big challenge, and just that fact alone will make sure that on-premises will not be dead within a year, so to speak. It's going to take a while, but is it going to diminish? Yes, but I think you're going to see perhaps for certain industries or certain countries, certain businesses, an acceleration of that diminishment, but it will slow down again, and that smaller tail will be very long in the time frame. You still have mainframe applications still running today, and I'm pretty sure that in 10 years, 20 years time, somewhere, somehow, there will be old-fashioned Windows applications or Linux applications, client servers applications still running. That's the nature of the business. It's not a magic world where dreams come true because you want them to. So.
Right. Yeah, that brings up a good point, because if I think back to early in my career, I worked for a Fortune 200 manufacturing company, and in the quality lab, we actually had a DOS version 4 machine. And this wasn't MS-DOS. This was IBM PC DOS version 4 running inside of that quality lab because it was going to be like $500,000 to upgrade this one particular station. So, you know, this was probably 10 years ago now, but still, I mean, you think about how long that piece of software, that OS had been in a production environment, and I think you're absolutely correct that, you know, in 10 years, there's still going to be legacy Windows applications running around, definitely. So we actually have a good friend of ours in the chat, Mike Nelson, another Microsoft MVP. So shout out to him. He makes a good point here. You know, we're talking about cloud. On-premises computing is a cloud, public, hybrid, and private. So that's definitely some terminology that I've seen in the industry lately. You know, now we're getting to a point to where our on-premises, you know, clusters, Hyper-V storage, it's a private cloud, and that's that whole cloud computing model is definitely starting to kind of work its way into all facets of the industry, definitely. Which kind of, you know, comes up to our second point here that we're going to talk about in a second. That's Microsoft Azure Stack. But before we get to that, one thing I wanted to touch base on is this third bullet point here, and that's, you know, hey, what if I'm a server hugger? You know, why should I care about the cloud? I've got my on-premises stuff. I've got my Hyper-V cluster over here. It works. You know, I've got my storage network and my SANs. You know, I'm happy with how everything's working. Why should I care about the cloud? You know, that's a question that I get quite frequently. And Thomas, why don't we start with you? What do you think about that people that ask that type of question?
Well, as people may know, I'm a huge fan of Windows Server, and to be honest, I love my servers. I love my Windows servers. I love to play with those and have it around and everything. But well, things are changing, and that was one thing I realized really like things are changing that we already knew a couple of years, right? That's not something new. But what I realized in the last couple of weeks was how fast things are going, right? So I don't think we can just stay in doing whatever like we did in the past 2, 3, 5 years, and we have to change, right? We have to adopt new skills, we have to learn new stuff, and that's where it's going. That doesn't mean like it's wrong to still be caring about that stuff, but we also have to adapt to new skills and new technology. I think that's going to be a funny thing to see because things are changing really quickly.
Yeah. So I love to hug a server. Basically, I can scale the hell out of hardware. I love doing that. It's a skill I just enjoy. But on the other hand, I've become more and more interested in cloud offerings, especially when it suits my needs, because no matter how well your SAN or your hypervisor environment is running, there are things that you cannot do. Or you can only do if you have the economies of scale to put everything 24/7 geo-redundant somewhere. And if you have to build that yourself, forget it. So if you have those needs, and those are becoming more prevalent, you have more mobile workforce needs, you have the modern workforce type of applications. If you want to build those and serve those, the cloud is a pretty good deal to start doing that. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that new projects are cloud first by default. And it's not a shame if you have to tell somebody, a manager or colleagues or clients or whatever, look, this is not going to work for you right now in the cloud 100%. But this and this will, and to solve the other needs, we'll do this. And it could be the hybrid solution, it could be an on-premise solution, it could be related to Internet of Things, data storage that you can't just pump real time into the cloud. There's all kinds of very good scenarios that are not perhaps 100% cloud, but that doesn't diminish the value of them. You just have to look at the needs, how you can solve the needs at what cost and with what benefits. And that's basically what engineering is all about. You build a solution with the tools you have at an acceptable price point. And sometimes that will be 100% cloud, sometimes it will be hybrid, sometimes it will be 10% disclosure in the cloud, and the backend is still on premises or in a data center. Anything goes, actually. You have a wealth of tools available. The only thing I can say is that I have seen the cloud become more and more capable and feature-rich. So 3-4 years ago, I wouldn't do lift and shift, not at all. I'm still not a big fan of it unless you need to for some reason. I'm more of a transition guy. But 3 or 4 years ago, I would say, look, I'm losing too many capabilities in the cloud to do infrastructure as a service. But today, that gap is becoming smaller and smaller. So for certain workloads and for certain companies and certain reasons, it might even be a good idea, even if I'm not a fan of lift and shift scenarios per se, because I always fear that people get lazy. Oh, we've got this running on premises. I'm going to lift and shift it in the cloud. Look, hey, I'm a 100% cloud company. Not really.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. You know, that brings up another point about the cloud, and we've got Norman in the chat kind of brought this up. You know, what happens when a customer goes to the cloud and they lose internet access for 2 weeks? And I could see that happening in, you know, some very, very rural countries. And definitely that is a major concern. I think we've touched on that a little bit, in that, you know, we won't see mega mass near 100% adoption of the cloud until, you know, connectivity in nearly all cases is addressed and has a high degree of uptime. Absolutely. So, so I think the next thing I want to do here is let's move on to our next major bullet point. You know, we've talked about the cloud a lot. You know, we've talked about how we've got this concept of public cloud, you know, like Azure, AWS, Google. We've talked about a little bit about hybrid cloud, about, you know, running workloads where it makes sense, you know, having some workloads on premises, having some in the cloud. And we've talked about private cloud too, right? You know, the idea of having, you know, our infrastructure on premises. And that brings me to the second point here, and the whole concept of Microsoft Azure Stack, and how Hyper-V and hypervisors in general tend to be getting abstracted and pushed under the hood. So real quick, so for the folks that don't know, Azure Stack is what I would call Microsoft Azure in a can. So you basically get, you know, a chunk of hardware shipped to your data center. It gets installed, and you have your own private Azure instance inside of your data center that you can carve out. You can consume the stack, and management of it is exactly like management of the public Azure is. So really, it kind of brings up a number of different questions for folks. You know, you've got the folks that, again, those server huggers I mentioned earlier. You know, they see a solution like this, and well, hey, Hyper-V is so pushed under the hood that I can't even access it anymore. So, you know, the first question that I get when I start having conversations like this is Azure Stack going to be the new way to do things on premises? And Thomas, I know that you've done a lot with Azure Stack these last couple of months. I think you'd be a perfect guy to kind of talk about that point and get us started on that.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. It's a valid question, a question I got a lot, and I can see, even though you don't get the question, people should know about it. So
Yeah.
It's a very good point. Well, first of all, you have to understand what Azure Stack is, right? And Azure Stack really is an extension of Azure. Like we brought this up earlier, it's part of the intelligent edge. So you have the intelligent cloud, which is basically Azure, and then you have the intelligent edge that could be IoT devices, or again Azure Stack, which then basically connect you to the cloud. And it brings Azure consistency, right? This becomes one of my favorite words, consistency, over the last a couple of months. Everything is about consistency, and it depends on what you need, right? If you're a cloud company today and you have some challenges moving to the public cloud, because you probably have deployed workloads on Azure, but you have some challenges that could be data sovereignty, so data has to stay within a country or within your data center or whatever. That could be one reason, or it could be technical reasons like internet connection, like latency for applications, all that kind of things, disconnected scenarios. Then if you're a cloud company and you want to solve those issues, Azure Stack is for you. If you are just doing virtualization, for example, if you're just traditional virtualization, Azure Stack is not going to be a replacement for you. If you just want to replace your VMware servers or with vCenter or your Hyper-V infrastructure with Virtual Machine Manager, Azure Stack is not going to be like a benefit for you, right? It's not designed to be that. It's really designed to bring the public cloud to on-prem and not just replace virtualization. So I don't think it will be replacing the on-prem world in total. It will help people who already want to use the cloud drive adoption, and it also drives awareness for Azure, right? So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I agree with. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. If it's meant to run native cloud applications on premises, but in a way you don't have to deal with the complexity of that, because the reality is building a private cloud costs a tremendous amount of effort, engineering skills, and money. And basically you don't have it. You might claim you have it. Some have claimed they have it, but there's not a lot of companies who can build a real cloud and deliver that. So the only way to do that, and if you have that data sovereignty requirement or whatever requirement it is, to have cloud on premises is to buy somewhere a prefabricated solution for that, because I would never advise a company to build a private cloud themselves. It's going to cost a lot of time, a lot of money, you're going to fail. So you don't want to do that. So, but if you have that need and you have those cloud native applications, Azure Stack is a great solution for you. And basically,
yeah, definitely. I think to weigh in myself on that a little bit. So my background is primarily from a service provider perspective before I came on with Altaro, and I see Azure Stack as being really interesting from a hoster or an MSP perspective, in that they can install that in their data center, or a colo that they have some rack space in, and just provide links to it for their customers to log in, carve off their own workloads, and consume the stack, as it were. So I think from that perspective, it's really interesting, and like you said, it's in no way going to replace virtualization on premises. But again, it's just another place that we can run workloads, and it's another way of doing things, right? So I think it's really interesting from that perspective. Mike in the chat actually has an interesting question that I see that comes up quite often. So we've got Azure Stack, and that's been talked about a lot in the last couple of years, right? But before that, we actually had Azure Pack. Not many people remember that, but there was Azure Pack. And Thomas, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Can you kind of explain how we evolved from Azure Pack to Stack, and kind of what happened to Azure Pack during that transition?
Yeah, it's a very valid question, and I was like a huge advocate of Azure Pack as well, and I did quite a few projects with that. So Azure Pack was basically just bringing the classic or the Azure to kind of like on-prem. It was like the same idea as Azure Stack, but the execution was different, right? So they may build it on top of System Center and products which were meant to be running in traditional ways, right? And also like build it your own, right? So it was like, okay, here you have the software, you can build it your own. What we learned, or what Microsoft learned, and I think the whole industry is learning, also like the guys using OpenStack and so on, is it is very hard to build a cloud, as Didier said, right? It is very hard, and it's very time consuming. And then you look at the big cloud vendors like Amazon and Azure, which basically update their services daily, right? And you have to keep up with that cadence, especially when you want to have consistency. You cannot like build a consistent cloud and then let the public cloud run with updates for a year and you stay on the same thing. You're going to have like two separate clouds, right? There is no consistency anymore. So I think Microsoft learned and said, okay, we have to build it as an appliance, kind of like a integrated system approach. Like we give you we build the design, we make sure with the hardware vendors they do exactly what we want. That allows us to bring updates faster, right? And that's what's going to happen with Azure Stack, right? You can only buy it as an appliance, as an integrated system, where you get like predefined hardware and everything from different vendors, obviously, but you don't have to design it. This saves you time, and this also allows Microsoft to release updates much faster without going to a testing hell, right? So, by the way, to Azure Pack, it's still supported. There is like, I think to 2022, 25, I'm not even sure, but a long time supported, again with System Center. So if you have invested into that, that's fine. There is also Azure Pack connector for Azure Stack. So if you have built your Azure Pack environment and you want to like move to Azure Stack, this is not like a move or lift and shift to Azure Stack, but it helps you to integrate, at least in the UI, the existing Azure Pack solution. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I hope that clarifies a little bit what's going on there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a common one common question that I run into. We've got a couple of good comments here in the chat. One question. This is one I see quite frequently too when it comes to Azure Stack is the entry cost. That's one thing that there's not been a lot of published information on until very recently. But I don't know if you guys have heard. What are your feelings on the general entry cost? So the numbers that I've heard from the vendors that I've talked with is anywhere from 150,000 to 250,000 as being the lower end of the entry point, which that's a pretty large area, right? But what have you guys heard to kind of give people a little bit of a better idea of what they can expect as far as entry point goes?
I've heard things all over the map, let's put it that way. Anything going from starting from 65,000, which was a bit on the low end.
Yeah.
I consider that. But on the other hand, look, what you are doing is you are buying a private cloud solution to put in a data center somewhere, right? It's going to cost a certain amount of money. It is not the cheapest solution if you compare it to pure virtualization as you know today. That's a given. But that's not what you're buying. You're buying a cloud. And if you think buying that private cloud, if you really need one, you will be able to afford the entry price Microsoft puts in it because it's a cloud. Compare that to the cost of trying to build and design it yourself and having it collaborate and cooperate nicely and consistently, right? To use the favorite word of Thomas today. Try and finance that one. It's not going to happen. So you have to put things into perspective. If you today need 20 VMs, you might very well already be taking them from a virtual private cloud provider or virtual private servers or whatever. If you have 200 or more, and you have a data center or you have some data center co-location, you might be running it more cost efficiently over there and doing it yourself if you have the people to do so. The moment you start talking about a cloud and you want to put Azure Stack and you compare that price to a solution that is based on pure virtualization in small to medium environments, it's not really a good comparison.
Right.
Because the money you're going to spend on building the cloud native applications is going to outweigh any cost of that appliance.
Right. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Didier here. If you think about building that your own, it's just different, right? Even though you use software like OpenStack or Windows Azure Pack and System Center, building that cloud and designing that and then like operating this will cost you way more than like just buying an Azure Stack solution. When you want to go with the same features as Azure Stack, right?
Think about all the private clouds that have failed over the years now, from very big name vendors. It kind of gives away that there's only a few that can do it, really.
Right, and it's not easy. I think that's the common theme that we keep coming back to is, if you want to provide similar services, like you said, Thomas, if you want to provide the same level of features and functionality that you would get in Azure Stack, doing it yourself is not easy. Absolutely. So another comment here in the chat from John. Just more of a comment. They're kind of a medium-sized hosting company. And the cloud is all about the benefit of reliability, 99.99% uptime. But the problem is they've got an ISP where the ISP does not provide enough of an SLA. So the ISP's uptime looks to be, not quite 99%. So I think the point that John's making here is the fact that you can only provide as good SLAs as your weakest link in your infrastructure, right?
Sure.
Which comes back to the point that, hey, it's not an easy thing to do, and it kind of talks about best practices. I don't know a lot of companies that up front make that determination that, hey, my ISP can't provide the level of uptime that my hardware and my software can. So that's a definitely a good observation, I think. So that was thanks, John, for pointing that out. And let's see, we've got a couple of other good points here in the chat. So definitely, people, keep them coming here. You know, again, this conversation is involving you guys as well, so don't be shy. So let's see here. Yeah, some of these tie in with a couple of the next bullet points. So let's move on to one of the next bullet points here, and we'll come back to some of the comments. So one thing that I get questions about with Azure Stack is the fact that it's kind of that all-in-one appliance type of deployment, right? You manage it completely using Azure Resource Manager. You don't have access to the different components in there. And one of those components that we're all used to working with on-premises is Hyper-V. So in Azure Stack, you know, I've got this hardware in my data center, you know, and you know, a lot of people would think, hey, it's in my data center. Why can't I, you know, open up Hyper-V Manager, connect to the Hyper-V host inside of that appliance, and actually carve out some VMs? You know, will Hyper-V in mass ever be made available to us? And I don't think it ever will, because it's focused on that appliance-based approach. Didier, what are your thoughts on that? I'll let you lead on that.
I hope not, because it would create a tremendous amount of problems. It is not the model, it is not the design, it is not meant to be. So if you want to consume cloud, if you want to work cloud-like, whether it's in a public cloud or in a private cloud, you're going to have to rule and play by the rules of the game. That's right. That's how it's done. You cannot have it both ways. So you have the abstraction and the automation on top of the abstraction, but to make that consistent, to make sure that works as it is intended, to make sure that the resources are available and assigned, to make sure that everything is patched correctly, you cannot start putting your own stuff in there, start connecting with your own tools and start messing around. There's no way you're going to do that in the public cloud. Well, the private cloud is exactly the same. The thing is, if you have that need, and there is no shame in it. If you have a need for a virtualization solution on premises or hosted, or in infrastructure as a service where you have less of cloud native applications, it's all fine. Just do it, but don't let that one thing, that one solution, try to be everything to everybody. That's not what it's intended for, and you shouldn't try. Sometimes I notice with some of the ISPs or the service providers that where will I deliver the value, right? But it's not meant to be a replacement of an existing virtualization solution where you plug in your own services and create extra revenue from that by adding value. Right. It is more or less a cloud, and if your customers need that, you can provide it. But that doesn't mean that you're going to exploit it or commercialize it in the same way as you've done virtualization, data backups, websites, etc., etc. It's just another world, and the two mix, but not in the same solution.
Right, right. Thomas, you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, no, I totally agree. I mean, Didier said everything, and the only thing I want to add is like what I also see that it matches in that discussion is that people sometimes still tend to look for the 100% complete solution, and to be honest, that's not going to happen in our field anymore. It's just if a solution fits today 80%, that's already good, and the other 20% are probably not critical for you, then go with that solution. And from those 20%, I mean, the cloud is going forward, and people and Microsoft will update, or also the other ones will update. And from the 20%, it will become 10%, which is not ideal, and then probably 5%. But don't expect everything to be perfect. That's the where you will fail all the time, because you're going to be slow until you build that perfect solution. It's already time to upgrade, right? This is not. By the way, it's funny. This is not only going on to the cloud. It's also about the client. I could also see that with a lot of companies in the modern workplace world, where they are spending a lot of time designing their own builds of like Windows 7, Windows Vista, whatever they had. And now with the Windows 10 update cycle, until they finalize their own build of Windows 10 Creators Update, there's also already the full Creators Update released, right? So they cannot even keep up with that because they do that over-engineering, as I would call it.
Yeah. I've spoken to very large IT services providers, global ones, and the response was, we will start supporting Windows Server 2016 and 2018 because we are still testing. I'm already testing new stuff to replace it. What are you talking about? And that's a mindset that is instilled in some very large entities, whether they are commercial IT service providers or companies, which is, it's gonna bite them. And as Thomas has said, that speed isn't decreasing; it's still accelerating. It might have to slow down over time because nobody can keep up. Someday, some moment, but at the moment it's still increasing. Then, if you want to play that game in that world, it's gonna bite you. So it's inevitable.
Right. Well, I want to kind of talk about the third bullet point here. Could we ever end up in a world where the hypervisor has become so commoditized and so abstracted that we don't even see it anymore? I think we're seeing that a little bit already in some areas, but definitely that's a big concern for people that have been used to using hypervisors in the way they've used them for the last 10 years, but that's also a concern for software vendors and system integrators. Thomas, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think?
Absolutely. So I mean, we had this pre-discussion before, and I think that could happen. I mean, it's not that Hyper-V is like going away and we will not deal with Hyper-V anymore, in the traditional way. But there are a lot of things which is Hyper-V inside, which we don't realize it yet, right? So, for example, I think Xbox One, the software on Xbox One runs Hyper-V. To switch between the game and like apps and things like that, different environments. Then would also, if you run the Fall Creators update of Windows 10, there is a little security feature in Windows in Edge, which is called, I think, the Windows Defender Application Guard. I looked that up this time, which is basically just running Edge inside a Hyper-V isolation, right? You don't see any VMs or anything. You cannot go and start and stop something, but it uses the Hyper-V technology, and I think the same thing is going on with containers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I by the way, I like that because whenever I used to have to investigate something like ransomware or an infected site, you had to spin up your VM, you had to make a checkpoint, you had to go and test it out, what's happening there, then you had to not to forget to apply the checkpoint to get rid of all the nasty shit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, that takes care of certain of those elements that I used to do in my paranoia as dealing with a potential ransomware site or whatever. It makes life easier for me. It makes life easier for your support system, because if people are less vulnerable because it's virtualized and the state is discarded afterwards, why not? I like that fact. And like Thomas said, it's happening with containers. Containers run on bare metal or on a hypervisor, because the hypervisor adds to the security of the container, basically. But it's all about the container. The hypervisor there doesn't really matter. It's run for you perhaps by a public cloud provider. But even that container is going away slowly but surely. I mean, depending on the business you're in, the virtual machine or the container will be very visible and very important. But as an consumer IT company, so to put it, that writes code to deliver a certain service or a product to your customers, you might not even care and never deal with containers ever. That's also okay, because that's something I see in the cloud. There is a tremendous vast array of technologies, and you are not going to be a bad cloud engineer because you never deployed 17,000 applications on containers. You have to know what they are used for, etc., etc. But you might be a very good cloud engineer doing hybrid solutions or building applications with Azure Functions, with NoSQL databases. There is too much to do that one person has to know it all, let alone that one company has to use it all. So depending on where you are in that market segment, a virtual machine might still be very important to you the next 5 years, the next 10 years, because it's the basis of a lot of clouds and for a lot of containers. It's useful. but it's being abstracted away more and more and more. And in some cases, like, yeah, if nobody ever told you or you read it, who would have known that Xbox is running on Hyper-V?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's a good
Right.
point. So I think this is a good segue into our third and final topic area, and that is containers and microservices. Containers and microservices is definitely a huge buzzword that's out there right now. And I know there have been a couple of comments and a couple of questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to, and I want to just make sure before we move on here that the folks that have asked questions that we haven't had time to get an answer to, definitely look for the answers to those in our follow-up blog post. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on. So before we get into this conversation about containers, I always like to just do a quick definition of what a container is. That way everybody kind of has a baseline understanding. And containers being a big buzzword in the industry out there, I think I see them most often compared with a VM. I mean, they're not the same thing as a VM, but the way I would define a container is it's a containerized image that contains a super stripped down instance of an operating system. So in the case of Windows containers using a nano server image, I think they've got the container image down to 50, 60, 70 megs, somewhere in that area, really, really ridiculously small. You package your application framework on top of that, whatever language your application is using, and then your application. And it's like a super small, tiny VM, I guess, is the way that most people relate to it. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion lately about containers, the benefits, whether or not they're going to replace virtual machines. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about them. And the first thing I want to talk about here, guys, is what's your opinion on whether or not you think that containers are going to be the main deployment mechanism for workloads moving forward? And I think I'll kick us off on this one myself. I see containers being another tool. You know, I've kind of talked about how the cloud is a tool and Azure Stack is a tool. I see containers being a tool as well. I think moving forward, the applications that are designed with containers in mind and can take advantage of some of the benefits of containers will be deployed in that method. But I don't think virtual machines are going to disappear overnight. I think they're going to be around for a long, long time yet. And again, it's a case of deploying that workload where and in a form that makes sense for that workload, and I think that's what we're going to see containers do. Didier, I'll let you go next on this one, and kind of what your thoughts are.
It's well put. I mean, a container has to be a container and shouldn't turn into a VM, because that's not a discussion, right? I want a container to do this. I want a container to have persistent storage. I want a container to be able to do that. And then it's like it's suspiciously starting to sound like a virtual machine. We've got that. It's okay. Let a container shine where it shines, and perhaps you don't need them. Perhaps you are going to build your code on top of that abstraction layer that runs in containers, and let somebody else deal with the complexity of a container. I've seen developers play with containers, and they don't like the plumbing. They hate it. Everybody has this esoteric idea about the DevOps nowadays, that developers do everything from A to Z, and they know everything about TCP/IP, networking, load balancers. In general, a lot of developers want to focus on the code. They have to write the algorithms, and they don't like to deal with too much of that plumbing. And that container model, at the moment, at the state of maturity it is in the Microsoft ecosystem, it tends to put a lot of that in their hands again, and they're not always that enthusiastic, which is fine. It's just a means to an end. I have never been focused on we need to use containers. No, I need to solve a business problem. I need to deliver a service. Are containers the best solution for that? Well, then we'll use containers. If Azure Functions are the best solution for that, then we'll use Azure Functions. And I wouldn't worry too much about. I haven't specialized in containers yet. Am I behind the curve? Am I going to be unemployed in 5 years because I don't know anything about containers? No, the only advice I can give that, keep learning and keep training yourself to automate things in whatever language you want. It all carries over to the other language. Just make sure that you know what's going on in the world and where you fit in. But don't get that set on the containers are going to be the end all be all in the next 5 years for me. And if I'm not the specialist in them, I'm toast. So no, not really.
Good insight. You want to weigh in on that as well, Thomas?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the only thing I want to add is, like, yeah, containers for me, I see them as a huge accelerator. I'm not sure if, again, it's maybe we'll see more microservices deploying, things like service fabric and things like that. But I see them as a huge accelerator in terms of coming from VMs, moving to other services like microservices, cloud scale service, and things like that. And containers just help accelerate that. That's my opinion.
One of the fun examples was like one I didn't really see coming, but there's a tremendous successful use case for people who are still on IE6, I believe, for hundreds or thousands of internal company apps. And how do you get rid of that? And basically they put it in containers. So now it runs on a fraction of the infrastructure. It's a lot faster, and they've gotten rid of having to maintain an operating system that can run and work with IE6, right? And ES and the old ES servers on 2000, 2003, it's all gone. And those are solutions, very creative solutions to a problem. It might not have been the intention, but it's hard to predict what people will use technologies for. But in the end, is it important? Yes, but it might not be that important to you.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to that whole idea of running the workload in the right place and the right way, right? I mean, that's a great success use case there, definitely. That's an interesting one. I think we've kind of addressed the second bullet point there as part of our conversation. Could containers one day replace VMs? I think we've answered that in the fact that they're kind of supplemental to each other, right? But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, from the IT pro's perspective, how do you see containers changing the day-to-day life of the IT pro? I think personally, from my point of view, I see containers as just being another thing that the IT pro has to manage and take care of. So Didier, you use the terminology of plumbing. Developers don't like the plumbing of containers, the underlying fabric, the infrastructure that's supporting those workloads. And I think going forward, I see IT pros having to support containers and the underlying infrastructure in much the same way that they have to support virtual machines and its underlying infrastructure. It's just going to be another fabric that they have to worry about. What do you guys think?
Depends a bit on the type of developers and IT pros you have. In essence, the world is becoming software defined, right? Right. So in that model, you have to work as a team because there is no one-man army that can do it all. But that team might have to take a bigger interest in all things from A to Z within the solution. If you're going to be agile, if you're going to go DevOps and beyond DevOps, service resilience engineering, all that sort of fancy talk, then you're going to have teams that are capable and willing to do it all and help each other, everybody with their strong point. But this artificial segmentation, that means that DevOps isn't where it's supposed to be at, and perhaps containers will help improve the situation. But perhaps the way to achieve DevOps and beyond DevOps is Azure Functions, right? That it's completely, everything is completely abstracted away. Don't worry about scale sets. Don't worry about networking. You just write code and you run that code in a cloud, and it does its job and it scales automatically for you. It all sounds very esoteric. It's perhaps a bit too optimistic and positive what I'm saying right now, but you see where I'm getting at. Actually, it would be ideal if you could abstract every IT pro away. At the moment in the cloud, I only see more and more work for IT pros. So again, if you are scared for your job, I don't think you have a problem. Do you have a problem if you say, I have my VMware host and I've set it up in 2012 and it's still running nice today and I'll keep it running for another 15 years, then you have a problem.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to die in the workload. Don't worry.
Right. Thomas, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, just the main thing is, I think, for all of us in this industry is to stay agile, right? And keep on learning, keep on adapt to new technology. That's the key. There will be enough work, definitely, more than enough.
Right.
And it's going to be different, but it's also going to be fun.
Definitely, sure. Definitely. Well, I think that's a good stopping point for us. What I want to do here is just give people a couple of minutes to kind of put in their questions, kind of put in their comments, anything that they want to add. We're going to do our final Q&A and comment section here in just a second. While you're doing that, I'm going to mention our latest instance of our product, Altaro VM Backup version 7.5. We focus on a couple of key things here at Altaro. You know, we focus on efficient backup setup. It's got to be easy to use. We focus on full control, feature-rich, powerful features, and really, I have nothing but good things to say about our support too. Our support team is another major keystone of our company, and we don't do tiered support here at Altaro. When you call, you get a quick response, and you have someone own your issue from start to finish. So the other thing that we've recently added, you know, we've been talking about Azure a lot, so I wanted to mention this real quick. In version 7.5, we added the ability to offsite backups directly to an Azure storage account that utilizes the block blob storage, and it's very cost effective and it's very simple to do. So if you want a little bit more information on any of that, you can go to altaro.com/azure-backup, and you get all kinds of different information regarding that. For the sake of time, so we have more time for questions, I'm going to skip over the demo today. And again, coming back to our final Q&A and your last chance for input here. So I think we've got 3-4 minutes, maybe time for one question or two. Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them, because we always do a follow-up blog post that covers the points that we didn't get to during the conversation. So one thing that was asked earlier that I wanted to kind of come back to was you know, about data sovereignty. We've kind of talked about that a little bit here, and we had Andrew in the chat ask, you know, how would a lot of these services be applied to K through 12 education? There are a lot of laws that really require data to be stored in the same country, you know, yet a lot of providers tend to host outside of that country or in different countries. And if I put my public cloud hat on first, I know that Microsoft has gone to great lengths to try and address a lot of those data sovereignty issues by you know, having data center regions in countries that have really stringent laws like that. But I know that their play with Azure Stack as well is to try and address that as well, with the hope that regional service providers will host their own Azure Stack that organizations concerned about those laws can leverage to, you know, like Andrew said here, make sure that the data stays within that region. Any thoughts, guys, that you want to touch base on regarding that?
So basically, be realistic. The laws are there. The laws are in place for a reason. But basically, it comes down to trust. And why do you trust something or someone? Why do you trust your police force? Because they are doing a good job and they are being audited for what they do. Everybody having their own type of police force per city, per region, probably is not going to work. You're going to have some economies of scale and standardization. And if there is something wrong with that police force, well, they have to be caught and they have to be sanctioned, and the problem has to be fixed. And that is the same case with technology. So what, do you trust encryption? Or don't you trust encryption? That's also a question you're going to have to ask yourself. Is the fact that it is in your own country that more secure, or is it just a legal requirement without any merit? I'm not saying it doesn't have any merit, but it's a question you need to ask. And I think over time you will start to see things evolve. It's a bit like the same discussion like my country. Well, nowadays we buy a lot of energy from our surrounding countries because we don't produce enough of it. So yeah, is that a problem? Is it really necessary? We're in the EU. We collaborate. Is that a problem? Is that a real hard requirement? Some people think so. Some people say this is old-fashioned. Why would you, right? Also, data is very portable, even if it is in your own country. So sometimes I think the laws are there for very good reasons. Sometimes they might be a bit outdated, and sometimes you have to look to more and other solutions to fix the problem. That's basically it.
Yeah. Anything to add, Thomas?
Not really. It's the same thing for here, and expect also that, as Didier said, sometimes the rules are there or are there for a reason.
Right.
Sometimes they're a little bit outdated because the reason has now, or they're not like the wording is wrong because things have changed, right? So we're also going to see there like a huge change in that as part. Again, as like the example I did about Switzerland, where you had to have physical access to your data, things like this is going to change, right? And
Right.
as you said, there are service providers or others offering those solutions as well, right? There are possibilities to get like a solution which fits for you, right?
Right. Definitely. Well, good deal. I think that wraps it up for us on time, gents. I want to say first off, thank you both for coming and sharing your insights today. It's been great having you both, and it was a good webinar, and I hope that everybody enjoyed it. So again, thanks for joining us today, gents.
It was
You're
a
welcome.
pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. So, and everyone that attended, I want to say thanks for attending. We've got a number of different resources here on this last slide here if you are interested in more information. And again, if you asked a question or had a comment that we didn't get around to talking about, definitely check out our follow-up blog post. We usually have them up in a week, sometimes two, depending on the level of questions or the amount of questions that we have to take care of. Again, that blog post will be posted out at altaro.com/hyper-v. So keep a lookout for that. And I want to say thank you for attending, and we hope to see you on another webinar here at altaro.com. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, gents.